bladed the road and then swapped it back to the the bucket loader. I always call it an excavator because it is. And then when I made this little driveway extension, the old culvert sits too tall, so this water all pools on the side of the road. Let me back this out a little bit. There we go. And you can see this little lake that I've created here. And I just dug this whole channel. Let's see if I can actually shovel and video at the same time. I'll get like a YouTube Rising Star Award for that. I mean, you can actually hold a camera and shovel. I mean, this is hard work, who knew? So what we're trying to do here is bleed this whole water system, and I'll re-culvert on this side since they moved the culvert. The ditch used to be back there, and they moved it over here. You can see the water's coming down, and I made a little tiny bump here, so it can still go that way once it's tall enough, but its first direction will be to go this way. And I just chenched through these trees, which I just had the excavator backed up right up against these trees. And so I was digging as hard as I could to get this to go into the pond. So the first bin of the pond is here, and that's the big one in the back. And that's my nice little trench all the way from the road. Hopefully, if that water decides that gravity still affects it the way that it should, there's a good chance that I'll have more water entering into my pond on a regular basis. Still not moving quite fast enough because I didn't open it up wide enough because, you know, using a shovel versus the bucket on the tractor was a poor choice. But let me pause this real quick and see if I can dig it a little bit deeper. Whew. So I just opened it up a little bit more. So now you can see the stream is moving nice and steady. And it's not perfectly graded, so there'll be some areas where it pools, like right here, kind of a bucket or a pool. And then as it enters into my little fancy ditch, it's got to build a pool up to overcome that first hump. And then it's just about passing that. Watching drainage is oddly satisfying. I have spent far too many hours of my life digging dirt roads to drain, and here I am again, doing the same thing. This needs to be broken down a little bit. This was problematic. I didn't want to dig too close here because somewhere through here, which I couldn't identify where exactly, the cable line runs. They didn't identify the roadside, they only did the inbound side, so that's what I get. But you can see water's coming in nice and fast. Don't pull up. In the future, when there's heavy rain, this will obviously erode some of these bumps and smooth it out to its favor, and then I'll come out with a shovel afterwards and smooth it again and continue to make it more appropriate for the application. But at the end of the day, it seems like it should be able to do exactly what it's intended to do. And this will all get caught in the first flush catch for the pond, which is where I'll have all the vegetation, and that will keep the sediment that runs off from the road, whether that be oils or other things, just dirt that shouldn't be in with the fish. This will filter all this muddy water into a plant matter basin that will then, once it overswells, pour into the bigger pond, which is where the fish will live, and they'll have a cleaned water via biofilter, which is what I did for my old pond. And that was just a little bit different of a pond entirely. It was self-pumping, so it wasn't, the water coming into it wasn't necessarily dirty from debris or like runoff oils or anything like that. So it was a little bit easier because it was just a filter for the pump that I made, so that I didn't have to filter the pond water for the koi fish. But this is not going to have a pump, so this water is going to always just be running in every time it rains, and I'm gonna see it making progress. Chasing the little tiny stream all the way to the pond. Eventually I'll probably, in this ditch particularly, the one that goes from the road to the pond, I'll put a culvert in there, like a 12-inch culvert, and then backfill over it just so that it doesn't, I don't have to keep maintaining it, because this was extremely difficult. I had the tractor backed in up against these two trees and the excavator bumping up against the fence, so it was a little bit tricky to get this all setted up. But now that it's there, it's good. I'll at least drain the water that got trapped. There's a little hole it found. Wow, look at that. It's probably pretty hard to see on the camera. There it goes. Chase it as it comes through. And this is a pretty dramatic drop off. Once I get to this side, I dug it pretty deep because these ponds are actually fairly shallow. So I wanted to make sure that I had enough angular drop or whatever to make sure the water could run all the way from the road to over here. Now you can see this is the pond, and by that I mean it's a flat, empty area with mud in it because it hasn't collected water yet. But here comes the first of the water trucking down, making its way to the pond. Look at that. The first water. Bam. Made it to the edge of the pond. That's success right there. So perfect. Now I just have to wait for a few more major rainstorms to let that actually fill this basin, and we should be doing good. The last big rainstorm we got, the big hole at the bottom of the main pond, which is about 2 feet deep, that completely filled. So I've got about 2 feet of standing water, which is kept in there. So the clay is doing a good job at holding it. And then I'm just waiting for more rain to fill the last 6 or 7 feet of water height that I'll have in there. And yeah, not too shabby. That is some water runoff collection right there. And this will at least keep this clay moist longer, which is one of the biggest things about this back area, is this is a little bit more shallow, so there's less clay, it's more sand. So I'll need this to stay wet longer to make sure that the clay actually stays nice and hydrophobic. There's some of that blue clay. And that is actually from iron. So that's non-oxidized iron. Iron and clay will make it red when it oxidizes and rusts. And then if the iron is not oxidizing, it will turn blue when it breaks down. So it's pretty interesting. You get that kind of an effect from iron in clay. I had no idea, and I've got a whole bunch of it. Running nicely. See it still pulling in. Perfect. That is success right there. Perfect. That makes me pretty happy. Now I just have to, that's the low point of the pond over there, so this water, I'll kind of clean this out and make that kind of drain directly to the back corner. And then up here on the top front is where I'll put a kind of a higher mound and then a drainage pipe. So the water will actually have to come in. It'll naturally, the heavier sediment will go to the back corner where there'll be more vegetation. And then as this pond swells to a certain height, then the water at the top will come over and spill into this pond. So it'll be a secondary safety measure to assure that the heavier particulates, sands and things like that will fall into the back end of the pond where the plants are, and the plants can just absorb them and try and break them down, or it'll toxify them and not the fish, because nobody wants toxic fish. That's for Mr. Burns and the Simpsons. So we'll leave it at that. Boom. Success. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any suggestions on drainage ditches and all that fun stuff. My first attempt at a larger drainage ditch.